Hi everyone, Clear's Glory Young here. So real quick, um, didn't get a good night's rest last night, and I found it odd in the essence of sleeping. Um, Something kept on waking me up, saying, "Hey, share these 5 things." That was a part of a presentation that I did at a DEI summit about 2 weeks ago. So I woke up and something was like, "Hey, share these 5 things," and I kid you not, I went back to sleep, and it's like something woke me up again. Hey, share these 5 things, and I'm not sure why do I need to share these 5 things, but I'm just here to follow the instructions, right? So let me give you a little background. About 2 weeks ago, I went to a DEI summit, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And while I was there, a part of my participation there was actually doing a presentation around trauma. I kid you not, before even the first day of the 3 days summit, um, there were so many things that were revealed to me from what I would say either a revelation or an epiphany or some type of insights that gave me the ability to think that even if I don't do my presentation, I could have came back home and be thrilled with just going there for that one moment. So that's that. Here's one of the things that was revealed to me, which I had no idea. Um, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. All right. So, being at a diversity summit, I never saw it that trauma was only taught from one angle for the past 400 years. Right. So, when I looked at that, I was like, wow, that's insightful because I never was aware of that. That all this time, everything that we've been getting in the context of trauma has been from one angle, just from a European standpoint. So let me now fast forward into now sharing this with you. So the 5 things that was a part of my presentation was way beyond the things that I've ever been taught about trauma. So when I started to reflect on it now and saying, hey, these are things that started to make so much sense for me while I was there at the summit, even before the first day of the summit kicked off. Literally, we went down a day before to be in the hotel and get accommodated with everything that was going on before the summit start, which also included me going to the location where the summit was going to be held and actually doing a test of my presentation on the actual computer system, because I know they had sent us an email that we weren't able to use our own personal computers. So I recall now going to do a test of my presentation on their computer to make sure that everything was still intact in the way I built it on my personal computer. And I kid you not, something wasn't showing up right on their computer. So I had to go home, not home, but go back to the hotel and rearrange it in my computer so it could work on their computer. And while I was rearranging that, I started to repeat what I call the practice run. And from there, things just started to make sense for me. And I'm like, wow. All right. So let's get to these 5 things. That I want to share with you that for me, I've never been taught these things from what you would call going to different trauma events or even going online and seeing other things that are being shared around trauma. These were either from my own experience of interacting with certain things or certain people, and these things came about, and I started to do what do you call put two and two together, and it made so much sense. So again, when I went to the summit, everything just started to make sense, and at the end of the day, I walked away realizing that trauma was only taught from one angle, and that was a European angle. So put it in practicality, 50% of what you know about trauma was taught just from one angle. So what we're exploring now is the possibility of showing you another 50%, which is going back now from what we would say the Kemetic days or the African days. All right. So here are the 5 things that something wants me to share with you. So these are called spiritual traits, and I align them in my presentation as that. So spiritual traits are traits that you're not actually able to see because it's spiritual, and when things are spiritual, you don't see them, right? So the first one is starting off whenever you're going through what is called a traumatic experience. The first thing that happens is what is called disconnection. So you disconnect. First aspect is from your senses. So when you start to see things, you will not see things clearly. When you start to hear things, you will not hear things clearly, right? So when you look at that now, the first aspect of that is spiritual disconnection, right? So someone could be right in front of you and saying certain things, and you're hearing something totally different. So that's a part of what is called the spiritual disconnection. And you have this that is very prevalent in our community. And I don't want to get into it, but I could tell you that there are things that are being said in the community, like right in front of our face, and we can't detect it that this is a lie. And it's often emphasized around the concept of the elephant that's in the room that nobody is noticing, right? Because spiritually you're disconnected and you're not able to actually detect these things that are what I would call a lie, right? So that's that. All right, number 2, while I was at this university and working there, I started to see the correlation between the students and the people in the community. So you have this thing called from school to prison pipeline, where you transition students into the prison at a later date in their life, right? And for me, I started to understand that concept under this concept when I started to see the correlation between the students that are at the university in comparison to the people that are in the community. It is called learned helplessness. And this takes place when you go through a series of adversities in your life. And let me just give you a quick example, like African Americans, or what you would say blacks, right? Been through slavery, racism, oppression, red line from like banks and stuff like that, right? All these adversities that they have been through, then it makes it now into what is called her learned helplessness. So when you learn these things that, hey, no matter what I do, it's always going to be hard times, then what happens, you settle for that and now you become helpless. Even if someone comes into your corner and said, hey, I'm going to do you right, then literally you would not accept that because you are in the position of what is called learned helplessness. And you can't see that, right? Again, it's a spiritual trait. The next one is quick. It's called RTC. RTC is resistance to change. This is why it's so hard for so many people to change and do something greater, because they have been into a position, going back to learn helplessness, that you have learned all these things that life is so difficult and you just accept them. So you become what is called RTC, resistance to change, which now leads to the next aspect. It is called POLR. POLR. What does that mean? Path of least resistance, right? So your resistance to change, and then you go on a path of what is called the path of least resistance, meaning that things that comes your way, you would literally look for the easier way to get out of things. Like you're in college or university and you're looking at it and saying, hey, how do I go cheat on this test rather than study for the test, right? You're in a relationship. How do you look at sustaining that relationship? You would rather go cheat and destroy that relationship than to find ways to build up the relationship. And the final one now comes into what is called, I call it 1DO. 1DO is what I called 1 degree off. So when you're younger, in your prime of, say, the ages of 0 to 5, if you get a hit in your life, that could change the projection of your entire life. 1 degree off, right? Meaning that, hey, if I get one hit from I was in that 0 to 5 years of age, right? That could determine how I'm going to be off for the rest of my life. What does that mean? That means that, hey, I go through some type of adversity as a child, and then whatever I aspire to become, right, I'm going to be off from that destination. Meaning that, hey, if I wanted to be a pilot when I was 5 years old, right, if I get a hit, some type of adversity, and I continue on that journey, then what's going to happen? I'm going to move forward in life where I literally now become someone that is no longer considered what I would say the final destination as far as a pilot. I would either end up being something else, right? So that is 1 degree off. And that is something that I actually learned from the context of the airport. So at the airport, what I learned by interviewing different pilots, it is called 1 degree off. And all of the pilots that are trained to fly, what happens now, they learn the 1 degree off, which is the context of saying if they're 1 degree off and they fly 60 miles, then they're going to land 1 mile away from their destination. So when I looked at that and I started to understand, so if they go 120 miles, then they're going to be 2 miles off their destination, right? And I started to now equate that to our life. Why is it that people start out at a younger age where they're saying, hey, I want to become this or I want to become that? And then they go through some type of adversity and then they end up 1 mile or 2 miles or 3 miles or even 20 miles off from where they originally wanted to land, right? So those are the 5 things. First, what is called disconnection. Second, learned helplessness. Third, resistance to change. Fourth, path of the least resistance. And then 5 is what you call the 1 degree off. Again, I don't know why I needed to share those, but I'm just following the instructions of sharing them. So hopefully this is something that could be beneficial to you and your future as you move forward. Again, we have not been taught the full aspect of what trauma is really about. And these 5 things that I just actually named, those are just 5 spiritual traits that are a part of trauma, as what you would call either the residue or what you would say when you take a medication and then you go through this process, it's called side effects, right? So these are just 5 side effects of dealing with what you call a traumatic experience. These are things that you possibly weren't taught growing up. So when you start to look at your whole life and your whole projection of where you started out in life and where you are today, you may not understand it, but it's a part of the residue or the side effects of actual a traumatic experience, which you may not encounter it physically when you started out in life, but past parents and grandparents and great grands, right? These are residues that passed over into the generation of who we are today. Just like a genetic where things can pass on through the genes, this is how trauma actually works, generation after generation, and it can pass on up to 7 generations. So again, I just wanted to come on here and share those things, and hopefully these things are a blessing to someone or somebody who needed to hear them. In the meantime, God bless.